Guys, Crypto with Dinny here. Another podcast. I've got Mark Morton with me today from Skilling Mining, making moves down in Cork. Mark, please introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Danny. I appreciate you having me on. It's good to be here.
Deadly, man. So we'll get straight into it. Tell us about your journey into Bitcoin, into crypto. How did it start? Where did it start?
Well, I suppose in comparison to some others, it's not exactly a long one. I've probably been dabbling in the space for 3 years, and like many others, I kind of fell through it. I kind of started my own personal journey in 2019, just trying to get up to speed. I suppose I was lucky, my background and my degrees in financial maths, and I obviously had a few guys who, in 2017, when we were just kind of finishing up secondary school, had done quite well. I didn't think much of it. I kind of 2018, kind of getting into 2019, then I kind of started asking myself, how did these guys do so well? And just started asking them the questions. And in fairness to them, the guys in my course who had done well in it were extremely helpful, and they kind of set me down the right path, whether it be videos or people to follow, people to listen to. And I just started getting stuck into it, kind of towards the latter end of 2019, and slowly but surely went through the DeFi phase, did that for 18 months, then kind of swapped back to the Bitcoin side of things, and finally kind of tried to understand the whole space as best I could. And, that kind of led to me to getting in touch with an individual who wanted to get more exposure, I suppose, to the Bitcoin space. They had another business of their own, and they kind of wanted to get more involved with Bitcoin, and they kind of wanted to make an Irish company of it. We were both from Cork, and they were kind of thinking, what's the best way that I can get more exposure to the space? And I've been in here for 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, dabbled a bit in 2017, and now I want to be a bit more involved. And so we kind of started trying to figure out how could we build an Irish business around the space. And we went through a load of processes, looked at funds, we looked at trading, you look at all these kind of different aspects of it. But the kind of conclusion we kind of came to is, who are the biggest accumulators and holders of Bitcoin? And, that's what we want to be. We want to get as much Bitcoin as we possibly can. We never want to sell it. As that's not always practical as a business, but that's the kind of end goal. You see Hut 8 and these other miners doing that, where they don't sell any Bitcoin. And the conclusion we came to is, the biggest accumulators of Bitcoin are miners. And so how can we make that work in Ireland? It's obviously easy to try head elsewhere. People are doing it in Canada, the US, obviously you had China for a while, but we kind of wanted it to make it work in an Irish perspective. And so that's kind of what led us to starting Skilling Digital Mining and seeing how we can kind of increase the amount of hash rate that's coming out of Ireland for real.
Yeah, I remember I seen something not too long ago, and like Ireland's on the map when it comes to Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, see, that was a kind of question that we got thrown at us for, a lot.
Not all you.
No, we wish it was, but it doesn't. It's definitely not the case. When we looked at the figures, I think the figure for a while was something like 6% or something that we definitely didn't think was right. And the only kind of conclusion that we come to in here is that it's definitely not real hash rate. Given everything that kind of went on in China and the use of VPNs and the amount of data centers we have here, the only kind of conclusion we could maybe come to was that the hash rate was seemingly coming from Ireland because it was bouncing through a data center or a VPN that was pinging an IP address from here. But in reality, that hash rate could be up in a mountain in China connected to a hydro dam, and it was just seemingly coming from Ireland because, you've seen the electricity prices here, and there's certainly not a lot of on-grid mining. And so there's no real, justification for that 6%. So that's the only kind of conclusion we could come to.
That makes a lot more sense, because I was like, well, where are all these people? Because I can't find them, or they must be seriously underground.
Yeah, exactly. We were thinking the exact same thing, but I suppose that's the conclusion we had.
Deadly. You mentioned DeFi. Would you be able to explain DeFi a little bit? A beginner's quick guide, maybe, to what is DeFi?
Well, I suppose DeFi, or decentralized finance, to me kind of means or represents the move away from the legacy system we have today, which is kind of governed by individuals and bodies and gatekeepers and a lot of middlemen, and it represents a move into a decentralized finance peer-to-peer world that's governed by individuals and anonymous nodes, and ultimately is represented by an immutable digital ledger that isn't governed by anyone really. It's governed by everybody as such to an extent. And all that kind of really means is it allows me and you to transfer value between each other without any third party intermediary that can affect it or intervene.
Sure. And yeah, just that you mentioned your journey was sort of DeFi first, and probably with your background, it's what interested you. But now you've come to the conclusion you're more focused on Bitcoin. Uh, how or why? What separates Bitcoin? Why aren't you diluted throughout crypto?
Yeah, I suppose that was a long process. The guys that I was kind of surrounded by were heavily Ethereum and heavily DeFi, and I did dabble in that space heavily for a long time. And the kind of conclusion that it took me a while to come to is I watched all these projects that I kind of invested in and spent a lot of time researching ultimately do very well. And after 2 years of being involved with them, suddenly kind of die out. There was projects that I looked at, and they're seemingly excellent projects. You read white papers and Medium articles, but ultimately, when they have a team of individuals behind them, as soon as the kind of hype started to die down and we had serious drawdowns, it was almost crickets in a lot of these projects. And in the background of that, with all these projects, I always kind of had this idea of, oh, I'll rotate them into Bitcoin eventually. That was always this underlying idea that I had. And I didn't. I got to the stage where I watched them go, some went 4x, they go 5x. When the hype started, you could have put them on a spinning wheel and thrown a dart at a project and it probably would have done pretty well. And I kind of started asking myself, if the end goal is to convert all of these into Bitcoin anyway, I watched them all fly up. I haven't done anything about it. And now they're below what they were when I initially bought them. And so clearly that I didn't do what I said I was going to do. So, why do I want to convert all of these into Bitcoin anyway? That's kind of question I asked myself. And I kind of started seeing that the important part of this is decentralization and, the idea of kind of true digital scarcity. And that was the reason I wanted to swap them to Bitcoin in the first place. And so I also started looking at, what had happened to the projects and, why had they kind of inevitably failed? And there was kind of this underlying sense in the DeFi space as things really kind of started to froth up and get a bit more heated of kind of build fast, break things and fix it, and a lot of the time these projects didn't get fixed. There was ones that I spent months kind of following and everything was looking good. And because inevitably I'm not a coder, but the code was rushed, they were hacked, you'd all these seemingly NFT smart vaults getting drained of liquidity. And eventually I kind of said to myself, I looked at my portfolio and so many of these projects had inevitably died out, whether it be bad code, a lack of continuity. And I then added up, how much had I paid in gas fees for all of these projects? You include all that kind of side of things. And I kind of just said to myself, if I had just gone with Bitcoin in the first place, I probably would have done okay. As in maybe I kind of outperformed it anyway, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that I think at the end of the day, they're all going to trend downwards against Bitcoin. And, that's kind of the opinion that I've come to. And that the long-term goal, if it's always to get them into Bitcoin eventually, then why don't I focus on that? And I suppose that's kind of where I kind of started to draw myself away from DeFi and really go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and start to understand the process that they had gone through from 2009 to build what it is today, and how important, true decentralization and digital scarcity is. And that's kind of the conclusion I came to, where instead of dabbling in this altcoin casino and looking at all these different projects and spreading myself out, I'm essentially becoming a trader. And I need to acknowledge that. And if it ever comes around again where I want to dabble in the altcoin space again, I'll be under no illusions that these aren't things that I want to hold long term. That was kind of the big question I came to, and especially as things started to froth more and more, people were asking me, should I get this altcoin or this altcoin or this one? And what I started realizing is that I was buying Bitcoin with the intention to never sell it. No matter what the price. I didn't care what the price was, and I didn't care what the price was going to be in the future. But I never had that conviction with anything else. There was always a price that I would definitely get rid of that altcoin for Bitcoin. There's no way I'm keeping that. Or I didn't have the conviction. And then when you added in the fact that everything was frothing and going, so parabolic to an extent, I couldn't justify telling anybody to buy these altcoins at the prices they were at, whereas I was continuing with my dollar cost averaging in Bitcoin no matter what. So I suppose that's the kind of journey I went on.
Yeah. I think we all go through that journey, or I suppose In Crypto with Dinny, what we do is we try and teach people how to a bit more on investing principles, so that we're not, just emotional investors. Because I found, just like you found, we'll always make the wrong decision at the wrong time. We basically will do the wrong thing every time. So, and I think there's a safety in just, if you don't want to become a sophisticated investor, maybe just accumulate some Bitcoin. It's quite simple. If you want to own other things, well, that's like venture capital. You can't just own one and think it's going to win, because it's 90% failure rate in the first 5 years and another 90 in the second 5 years. So your allocations should be small and you should own a lot of them. And, you should rebalance your portfolio annually or quarterly or whatever way, but acting like a sophisticated investor will probably allow you to, possibly outperform Bitcoin, maybe not. But like for 99.9% of people who own crypto, Bitcoin, they have other jobs. It's not their full-time endeavor. So almost less risky to just accumulate some Bitcoin if you're not going to go through all the process that it involves. There was one other thing you mentioned there, and I'd just like to ask you a little bit about it. You mentioned that there are all these altcoins in your thesis are gonna trend down anyway against Bitcoin. Why do you see that happening?
Well, I suppose one big part was that when I first got into the space, I was basically all in on Ethereum. Ethereum was for me the be all and end all, and that was what I focused so much on. And what I started to see then is, you've all these other ones coming, people arguing about Cardano and Solana and Near and all these other ones that are constantly appearing and constantly putting their kind of hand in the mix and saying, I'm better because I have lower transaction fees and I have this many dApps. And the conclusion I came to is that I don't think any of them are going to win as such. I think they're going to continue to battle it out. And, Solana will head back up into the top 5 and Near might make its run. And at the end of the day, I don't see any of them winning, and in my opinion, Bitcoin should be taken off the crypto token list. I think the cryptocurrency market cap, confuses people a lot. Bitcoin, in my opinion, is the only like cryptocurrency. The rest of them to me are crypto tokens. And ultimately, I'm going to continue to watch this battle. I saw Solana, go from what I went, $2 all the way up into the 200s, and they'll continue to fight it out. But I think ultimately that battle will never really end between them all. And I think the realization that people will come to is the important part is the true digital scarcity part and a true decentralized network that people can build on. And, when you see what the likes of Jack Mallers are doing with the Bitcoin network, and you see Taproot and you see Taro and all these different, upgrades coming to Bitcoin, what I think that should happen is that they should all be built on a strong base. All these dApps, DeFi should be built on a proper base. Otherwise, you really aren't changing the current system that we have. In my kind of worry is that Ethereum kind of heads in a more centralized route with proof of stake, etc., and that you just essentially end up with maybe an upgraded version of the current system. But that's not what we want from this whole process. What we want is a new system, and ultimately I think that's what Bitcoin is going to offer in the long run.
Deadly. Another interesting point you said, and I'd agree 100% with you, is that people who buy Bitcoin buy to keep it. People who buy insert name, meme coin, whatever, buy it to hope more people come and they can make 5 grand, 10 grand, 500 quid, like whatever. But it's very different than people that are, when you've done a little bit of work on Bitcoin, you're like, well, this thing is really, really scarce. It's finite, and it's only going up in value, possibly forever, for my lifetime anyway. So my incentive is not to sell it, or maybe to break off fractions to consume, because ultimately that's why we invest. But I never want to get rid of the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think Bitcoin has been around for so long, and the method in which they kind of started Bitcoin, by making the code publicly available. You had Hal Finney tweeting that he's running Bitcoin, and that's kind of how people started, and that's how the distribution of Bitcoin kind of began very early on. I think they did it right from the beginning. And I think it's built itself in that decentralized manner. That's just my personal opinion. It's done it better than anything else, and it's not just first mover advantage. I think that's probably a weak phrase to describe what Bitcoin has done, since 2009. I think the method in which it's built itself up, and You listen to people like Austin Hill and what they went through to build it. I was looking at some of my altcoins thinking like, I can't believe I bought this, given everything that they've done with Bitcoin, and how much they went through, broken up friendships, block size wars, people falling out, and really focusing on, you've got one shot at making a new decentralized monetary system and network, and that's act accordingly. And, I personally just don't think, pre-mines or heading back afterwards to try and make something deflationary or fixing it that way. I don't like the whole build fast, break things and fix it after mentality. I really do appreciate the way Bitcoin was built, in that you've got one shot at this, don't mess it up, essentially.
Deadly. So let's say you're starting your crypto journey, Bitcoin journey today, and someone was to sit you down, or you were to sit yourself down and go, right, you're only out of school, you don't have money to be wasting. What advice would you give to someone to start investing into this asset class, to give to yourself perhaps?
I suppose now, I would just say, invest your time before you invest your money, invest your time into learning about it. And I do kind of feel like when I started, it was a lot less noisy, even in 2019 and early 2020, DeFi was really starting to pick up. But now the space, the amount of noise in the space now, I feel for an individual coming in who's trying to look at the NFT craze, they're trying to look at DeFi, they're trying to look at all the different layer ones, they're trying to look at Bitcoin, and they're reading articles from the Financial Times and all these other things about Bitcoin, and they're going to DeFi instead, and then they're getting rug pulled, or they're, something's getting hacked and something, they're going down 90%, and they're sitting there thinking, it's impossible to kind of win in this space. So I suppose the one thing I would just say is invest your time and kind of just take it slow. And I suppose I also wouldn't, reject the idea of someone spending a lot of time looking at the DeFi space, because, I've come to my own conclusion, after 3 years, and I'm Bitcoin only now, but I wouldn't think it'd be right for me to say to someone, don't try and understand that side of things. I definitely give the time to Bitcoin and DeFi, and come to your own conclusion as such, because someone might have a completely different opinion than I do on the space, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I personally like the fact that I did spend a lot of time. I don't regret all the time I spent on DeFi, because at least now I know what's on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
And I'm a lot more set in my opinion of Bitcoin only now than I feel like I would have been if I'd never given DeFi and all the other aspects of DeFi it's the time it needed. Because ultimately I think you kind of need that trial by fire sometimes to have the conviction that you need to be Bitcoin only and to dollar cost average every week and never worry about it, and ultimately think long term. And so I would just tell people to invest time more before you invest your money, and just really understand both sides of things, because I was I've done the rug pulls. I've when I first didn't understand the space, I've just come back to see balances at zero and learn the phrase rug pull in a trial by fire scenario. And you don't really want to get stuck into that space, because afterwards you'll be thinking that was 0.1 of a Bitcoin, or that was 0.05 of a Bitcoin, or all those gas fees were this much, and all these projects inevitably were worth nothing. So I just think have a full understanding of the entire space, and then ultimately come to your conclusion and go from there.
Yeah, and as you say, it's so difficult because there's so much, like you dilute yourself so much and you're getting nowhere. So you can feel for people when they come in and just really think, or like, whatever, it's too loud, I don't know where to start, I don't know where to begin.
Exactly, yeah.
I suppose that's our job as educators, to try and break the stuff down, make it simple, give little bite-sized pieces to just wrap your head around this, and don't worry about understanding everything at the one time. As you say, it's a journey, and your journey got you to where you are today, and you wouldn't change it because it's given you understanding of both sides, and helped you come to a position where you're comfortable and you don't worry, and you're sort of, I think, foolproof. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I would agree. You just need to eventually have that conviction, or you come to the conclusion that you don't want to be involved at all.
Yeah.
Some people do. Some people put money in, and they just think this isn't for me. They might find it too confusing. They might think the whole thing is ridiculous. Everyone's going to be different, and just because I've come to the conclusion that I'm Bitcoin only now, after 3 years, doesn't mean that someone else will come to the same conclusion. And so that's why the time is so important, I suppose.
Deadly. If we can pivot a little bit and talk a bit about Bitcoin mining, can you attempt to explain that in simple terms to us, please?
But I suppose one of the first things to probably go over is this whole idea of solving complex equations is inherently wrong. You know, that's kind of when I first started coming into the space and I kept seeing it solving complex equations, I was like, what does this phrase mean? And it's actually a lot, simpler than that. You know, when you hear the word blockchain or a block as such, and the kind of way that I tend to describe it is that every block that arrives on the conveyor belt and puts its hands up and says, I'm the next block that needs to be mined, that block will have a combination code. And all these machines are doing all over the world is that they're firing guesses. They're 24/7 firing guesses, trying to guess the code for the block. And all that happens is when a machine guesses that code correctly, it wins. And it's not a long process of solving a maths equation. It's a case of that machine threw the right hash or the right guess, and it guessed it correctly. And as a result, it wins the block reward. But as such, what's kind of followed from that is that you might turn on a machine and you can wait. If you mine on your own, you could wait 20 years before you guess correctly, because all you're essentially doing is writing lottery tickets every second of every day trying to win. And so what's kind of spawned from that is mining pools, and all the idea that I try to describe in that sense is that it's like doing a syndicate with your office as such to try win the lottery. You've, as a result, you're in this big group, so you've got more lines or more hashes being thrown at the block. And as a result, you kind of improve your chances of winning blocks consistently, as opposed to waiting 20 years and constantly being firing guesses into the atmosphere with, winning nothing. And so, but as a result of that, I suppose when you're a part of a pool or you're part of the syndicate, if your pool wins a block, you then have to share your reward with everybody else. But I suppose from a business perspective, what that does is it at least allows you to win a couple of blocks every single day. It allows you to, forecast revenues and try and understand, how can we earn money as a mining business consistently. But I suppose the key thing is that, and the joy of the decentralized, mining network that Bitcoin has, is that an individual can turn on a machine that's only putting out 8 terahashes and they can win. And it's a case of, if that tiny machine, you had someone a few weeks back who had a few, little helium miners sitting on their desk at home, and they were firing guesses just like everybody else, and they won the block. And I suppose it's not a case of those helium miners are going to have smoke coming out of them as they try to solve this complex equation for the next 10 years. It's a case of they fired a guess, they won, the block reward is theirs. And I suppose that's the best description that I feel like I could come up with for the mining process. Is all these machines are doing is firing guesses, trying to guess a combination code. And if they get it, they win, and they get given the block reward.
Sweet. And the block reward is at the minute 6 point something Bitcoin. So that's their incentive, is that the miners can sell the Bitcoin back to exchange.
Yeah, exactly. So the current the current block reward is 6.25 Bitcoin. So when the pool wins, that 6.25 Bitcoin is distributed proportionally to the amount of hash rate that you contributed, or the amount of guesses that you were firing when that block was won. And as a result, then, say if you, the 5 machines that we have upstairs in the office here, the 5 S19s whirring away every day, you'll see those block rewards. Say if slush pool wins 10 blocks a day, it'll just be 0.0000 whatever 2 of a Bitcoin, and that you just build it up that way. But you could also connect one of these machines to CK Pool, which give you the full reward, which you're mining, mining solo in quotes.
Okay, yeah. Proof of work mining, we see headlines of it being bad for the environment and stuff like that. Is that valid cause for Bitcoin's future or concern, or is it just a misunderstanding of the operations of proof of work mining? Or can you explain that to us, or elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Well, I suppose it's one of those things that I feel like will never go away. People are going to continuously look at the amount of energy that Bitcoin is using just as a simple total number, and as a result, they're going to come to conclusions and compare it to countries, or come up with a figure for electrical waste that says a transaction uses this much electrical energy and this much waste, when in reality, a transaction itself doesn't use any energy. The transactions are embedded in the blocks, and as a result, me and you sending Bitcoin back and forth to each other doesn't inherently lead to an oil and gas rig being fired up. That's not how it works. But I suppose the way I understand, or kind of the way I could look at the whole energy debate around proof of work and Bitcoin mining, is that proof of work in itself is essentially a blessing, because there's never been a mechanism by which you can instantly monetize energy and do it in such a flexible way that Bitcoin mining offers. And so as a result, you've a vast array of things popping up, I suppose. And so the way I see it is, if people talk about, getting rid of proof of work, but what you can do is use proof of work to decarbonize certain processes. And that's the way I think it should be done. So, you people running off of flared gas, you've got the Great American Minings, you've got the Crusoe Energies, that instead of flaring the gas, you're running it through a generator and you're mining Bitcoin with it, and you're reducing CO2 emissions by something like 63%. And that's a decarbonizing process that's come purely from the fact that you can monetize energy at source and be a buyer of last resort of energy. And if you didn't have proof of work, you didn't have mining, that wouldn't work. And I suppose on top of that, you now have a mechanism that instantly monetizes energy, but can also be instantly switched off. And then you see studies that Lancium have done in ERCOT in Texas, where if you have flexible data centers on grid, it allows for an increased production of solar and wind capacity, but it also leads to a net decarbonization of the grid, because instead of booting up an oil and gas turbine, you reduce your demand. And so that's kind of the path we're going down with Scilling Digital Mining as well, is that this is a new flexible energy asset, and that when you integrate it with the grid, it can have really meaningful effects. And that's kind of how we see the future of it going, where it's, instead of trying to decarbonize the proof of work process, use proof of work to decarbonize energy processes, which is, like I said, flared gas, flexible on-grid assets, using, increasing wind and solar capacity to mine Bitcoin, but then being free to switch it off as soon as the grid needs it. And all of these processes, I think, are going to be pretty meaningful over the next couple of years, because, the International Energy Agency have already said that if we want to meet our 2050, net zero goals, I think by 2030, we need 500 gigawatts of demand side. And, demand side can be batteries, it can be, or not batteries as such, sorry, it could be hydrogen, it can be switching off of Bitcoin mining. Everything will play its part in the demand side market. But for us to get 500 gigawatts, I think Bitcoin mining is going to play its part, because nothing is more flexible than Bitcoin mining. When you compare it to other stuff in Texas, like industrial processes, Bitcoin mining was the fastest. It's completely interruptible. If all these machines are doing is firing guesses, if you want to switch them off, be our guest. As soon as you turn them back on, they'll go back doing exactly what they were doing before. And that's kind of unlike any other energy consuming process we have at the moment.
Right. Okay. Very good. Is it the cost of electricity that matters? Is it profitable, say, for me to buy an S19 and plug it in here in my house in Dublin?
I'd say at the moment it would be just about profitable. Right. that would be one of those things. Like, the energy prices in Ireland have gone so high that on any given day an S19 would make you a small amount every single day. And so it is kind of a race for the cheapest energy on the planet as such. But at the same time, you can be a bit more intuitive with that. You can be just a container sitting buying flared gas, but you can also interact with the grid, use arbitrage and energy trading, and, as we said, be flexible assets, so you can operate in the demand side market. And that's kind of everything that we're focusing on, because I suppose for us to operate in Ireland, Skilling needs to be a bit more intuitive and a bit more innovative with what it's doing. We can't just sit on the grid and consume energy, because firstly, you don't want to do that at the moment. We're already struggling over the winter time with things using too much energy and not having enough capacity to meet it. And so that's kind of not what we're focused on. We are focused more so off grid and also kind of operating in the demand side of things.
It's I have a friend down the west, and he worked on wind farms, and he's a really smart guy. And I was always like, come on, you got to generate electricity. He's got a river running through his property, and it's on the side of a mountain. For years I've been like, come on, you got to, because I know he could do it, and I'm always peppering him, because it's like energy is only going up, and energy itself, I think for years it's going to become scarcer and scarcer and more expensive, and if you can be self-sufficient and produce your own, like you can possibly export it to your neighbors and stuff and have this little
Hmm.
small economy, like but as of yet I haven't got
Yeah.
he still doesn't get Bitcoin yet, but if I could just get him to, if I can produce a few watts down there, I'd be happy. Tell us a little bit about Scilling Mining, what you guys are doing, and sort of a bit about you.
Yeah, well, I suppose, as I said kind of earlier on, what led us to first being being a miner in the first place is, we wanted to be big accumulators of Bitcoin, and we thought being miners was the best way to do it. And obviously, most of our team being from Ireland, being from Cork, we wanted it to make it work here before we explored, going elsewhere. And I suppose what we kind of started looking at is Ireland's grid is heavily renewable, and there's a lot of dispatch down, which is essentially just curtailing and constraining of energy around Ireland, because our grid, at night time when the turbines are running full tilt and the grid doesn't need it, it's essentially told to turn down because it has nowhere for the energy to go. And so that's kind of where we initially started focusing. We were kind of saying, how could you make the most of this excess, or wasted energy? Because as we said, we don't want to just sit on the grid. We firstly can't do that because economically it doesn't make any sense. And so that's why we kind of went down the mining rabbit hole, because we said, maybe this can kind of work here, and mining is, in our view, the best way to accumulate Bitcoin. And so we went through a long process of looking at wind and solar farms, and eventually what we came to is anaerobic digestion, which is, I don't know if you've come across it, but it's essentially a process where you decompose food and farm waste and you get biogas. And so now we're in a position where we spent 18 months building up our processes as methodically and as slowly and as correctly as we can, because we understand that as the first Irish miner and a Bitcoin business, a lot of eyes will come with that, and of course, scrutiny in certain aspects. And so we just want to do things correctly. And I suppose now we're kind of at the stage where we have our own containers, we've built out our own processes, and we kind of understand how we can make it work. And we have our first site coming now in the short term, running off of biogas. And our overall goal is to just keep putting these containers that we build full of these miners into areas of constrained energy, curtailed energy, whether it be on grid, operating in the demand side market. There's a huge variety of ways you can actually make this work in Ireland. And it just took a long time to kind of see how that would happen, because at first, when you look at the on grid rates here in Ireland, you say there's no hope in hell that you can mine in Ireland. But I suppose after, a long process of seeing how this could work, we are kind of at the stage where there's a few options, and we're going to pursue them. So
will you buy the energy off these are these, if you could explain that a little bit more, what they are? I've had one of my clients was saying I produce electricity, and it was this biogas setup he had, and it was up the north, and he sold it back to the grid. And that, like, are they something on a farm or something, is it?
Yeah, so essentially, I suppose the anaerobic digesters are just these large tanks. You might see them, you'll see them sitting on farms. They have a kind of a tent above them, and what you do is you kind of methodically feed them with food and farm waste. And what happens is, as it sits in the anaerobic digester, it decomposes, and when it decomposes, it produces methane or biogas, and then you can obviously feed this biogas into the grid. But as I said, we never want to compete in certain aspects with the grid. There's a few other models which I suppose I can run through, but the simplest model is just you have an anaerobic digester that, if you added a bit more food waste, it could produce 600 kilowatts, but their export capacity with the grid is 500. And so as a result, then you might be left with 100, 120 kilowatts of excess energy that's being produced by the anaerobic process. And instead of just not pursuing that opportunity, what you can do is take one of the containers that we're building, put it down as a buyer of last resort, or whatever you want to call it in the industry today, and it will just offtake that gas. But what it's doing, it's allowing people who own these anaerobic digesters to monetize every single bit of gas that they could possibly produce, or run these anaerobic digesters to their maximum capacity and avail of their excess energy that they could produce.
Deadly. And these containers that you're mentioning, just to fill the guys in, I know I've seen pictures of them. They look awesome. They're just like a steel shipping container that you guys are fitting with Bitcoin miners.
But so our ones now these days are they're going to be manufactured completely from scratch. But yeah,
Okay.
they're basically just custom, mining containers as such. They're built from scratch and they're fitted with all the fans you need to fit a certain amount of miners in. And so if they have 120 kilowatts, that'll be 30 to 35 S19s. So we source them, you then build the container to match, and you place it on site next to these anaerobic digesters and just feed the energy then from the generator into the container and monetize it that way. And so these are just custom built custom built containers just for mining. And they just have shelving and fans and humidity management and temperature management and all these other things that they need. But in short, that's what they are.
Yeah, that's awesome. And effectively all you're doing is monetizing energy that otherwise was going to waste.
Exactly, yeah. You're just monetizing energy at source that would otherwise be wasted. And it's what the term that everyone kind of used for a long time, especially in the flare gas, is you're just a buyer of last resort. If someone can make a bit of extra energy, then go ahead and do it. If you can't export it, if you can't send it anywhere, if you said, exactly you said, if it's just going to be wasted, why not monetize it at source and add an additional revenue stream?
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at that of like, when you can monetize natural resources that are otherwise useless.
Mm-hmm.
Any country can. It's really interesting. Like, it's a whole new dynamic. That
exactly, and I suppose it's why it's very meaningful for us here in Ireland is that I spoke to a few individuals over the past couple of months who they're trying to do some very cool things, which is modular anaerobic digesters. So usually an anaerobic digester can be 500 kilowatts, megawatt, 2 megawatts, very large scale. And in those cases, you might have food waste coming from different supermarkets and all these invisible supply lines, but on a much smaller scale. And this is where I try and advocate for how kind of incredible proof of work and Bitcoin mining is. On a much smaller scale, you could have a 50 kilowatt modular anaerobic digester that you could put on every farm in the country. And I suppose the biggest issue that these farmers had, because there are people who tried to do it, is that no one wanted to go to the effort of getting a grid connection to send 50 kilowatts. It's not worth their hassle. It's not worth the money. It's not worth the time. It didn't make any economic sense. And, in short, whether it's money aside, people don't want the hassle, but with what we can do using the containers is that you can make basically a circular economy or a small closed system. And whether it be 50 kilowatts or 60 or any kind of small scale setup where you put a small anaerobic digester on a farm, you can thread the energy straight into a small container with 10 S19s or 15 S19s or even 5. And what you're doing then is the agricultural sector has come under a lot of scrutiny recently for methane emissions and spreading of slurry, making things worse. And what this could do is just be a methane capture, an on-site or an on-farm methane capture that instead of spreading any of the waste that they have or letting it decompose into the atmosphere, they build a small modular anaerobic digester, they hook it up to some Bitcoin miners, and they use the gas instead of letting it just go straight into the atmosphere, which will lead to a net reduction in emissions.
That's deadly. So what's the future for you guys? Is it that you're going to supply and sell these? Are you going to manage these, or how does the future look for Scilling?
I suppose ideally, what we want is to have, these containers with our logo all over the country. So whether it be using the small bits of excess, biogas from an anaerobic digester, or whether it be on a wind farm that's being constrained or a solar farm that's being constrained, and whether it be immersion and all these different things that we can do, we just want these containers dotted all over the country, soaking up all this excess energy that we can have in an innovative way. And long term, ideally what we want, I suppose, is to be a generator of energy ourselves, and so we want to help contribute to having a net renewable capacity on the grid. So we can fund an anaerobic digester in a location that the others wouldn't be great, and we can fund it all through Bitcoin mining. But at the same time, you connect the anaerobic digester then up to the grid itself, and you can operate in the capacity in these 3 markets, which means if the grid ever needs the energy while our main priority is mining, we'll fire that energy back to the grid, and ultimately make a difference. And I suppose that's kind of where we see this kind of whole circular economy with Bitcoin mining, working in collaboration with being a renewable generator ourselves. You know, there's so many processes that you can build around mining, and that you can do DS3, which is the Irish system where our Irish grid needs to operate at a certain frequency. And whenever that grid frequency fluctuates, you know, around the 50 hertz mark, what they might do is they'll give you a call and they'll tell you, we need your energy that you're producing, you know, stop the process that you're doing. And that's kind of where we see ourselves participating long term. And then, of course, you have the heat from these things that can be used. So if you have a farm that has an anaerobic digester that's operating in the DS3 and capacity markets, it's firing energy to the grid when it needs it, it's mining Bitcoin every other time, and then the energy is, or the heat is being pumped into a greenhouse next door that's, you know, producing vegetables or whatever it might be, or drying seaweed or whatever, you know, all these different processes. It's just a huge circular economy that, as I go back to, is built around the fact that proof of work mining is extremely flexible. You know, it can be shut off whenever it needs to be shut off, but it also, when it's not shut off and when it's working, it's monetizing energy, which is a really interesting concept that has a lot of, you know, various different uses cases.
Really, really interesting. There's one thing that I was just thinking I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned it once or twice, and it's that you just want to accumulate and hold Bitcoin. Why?
Well, I suppose from, you know, the whole digital scarcity aspect, I think, you know, we're sitting in a really interesting time where the idea of digital scarcity, I don't think is fully understood yet. You know, I think that long term, the idea is going to continue to catch on more and more, that this is something that's still, even after over a decade, is extremely new. And as a result, our long term perspective on Bitcoin is that it is going to continue to go up. You know, this understanding of, as you know, Michael Saylor kind of targets, is that it'll take some of gold's market cap, you know, and then if it even takes, you know, 25%, you get into the 100,000 mark and so on, which I think as we kind of enter a digital age is going to be better understood. And, you know, our long-term perspective on gold, or not on gold, on Bitcoin, is that in simple terms, number go up is the easy way to describe it. But there's a lot of things at play, and digital scarcity being one. You know, you look what's going on with the printing over the past 2 years of money, and you kind of ask yourself, you know, if there was a non-zero chance of people eventually saying, you know, I'm sick of this currency debasement. You know, we have another few cycles of printing that happen again, and eventually people say, I want a hard money, you know, and I want to swap to Bitcoin. And you have people that are coming up and they're being around miners, they're being around Bitcoin wallets, they're understanding how proof of work works, and they say, I want that swap. And I suppose when you factor in everything, holding Bitcoin and keeping your proportion of that digitally scarce, you know, you're one of 21 million, or you're two of 21 million, or obviously some miners have a couple of thousand, holding it, you know, seems to be the better long-term play than, I suppose, constantly liquidating it and putting your money into cash. Because as we've seen, you know, the Fed print 40% of all the dollars in existence over the past 2 years. I think holding the hard asset makes more sense.
Sometimes I'm too bullish. Well, like, I'm always like that because I'm an entrepreneur. We're always optimists, you know what I mean? I never realize things are going to be as difficult. But like, then sometimes I struggle to see, how can this not be a success? It's just going to happen in waves and cycles. The number will go up, more people will come in, people speculate on this, that, and the other, and then they'll sort of get orange pilled and realize, if I just held some Bitcoin, I wouldn't have took on as much risk, and I probably would have done as good, if not better. And then another couple of years go on, and we get a new wave, and, you know, new higher highs and higher lows, and a new batch come in until we're just eating into the whole world's population, you know. And this has happened before my time in Bitcoin, and this will happen after my time, and that it's just outperforming everything. Yes, it lead into to gold, but like, it's eating into property as well, because in my consulting, at least once a week I have someone saying, Dinny, I'm selling my apartment, Dinny, I'm selling my house. Like, so they're moving out of physical property and moving into digital property. It's happening in the stock market, because traditionally it was just stocks and bonds, but now there's a Bitcoin element being squeezed in, and if it's 100% you squeeze it in, it means Bitcoin is pulling capital out of both of them markets as well. And yeah, maybe I am too bullish, or, you know, it happens. It just, the time frame is
absolutely,
no one knows, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. But I suppose the kind of key thing that you come back to is, you know, given, you know, people coming out in my generation, is that we've kind of been priced out, as you said, of of the hard property market. You know, we're sitting here and we're coming out of college and doing what our parents did, which was making one extremely, you know, important decision, which is you buy a house and you avail of all that this inflation that we've seen over, you know, the past 20 or 30 years. And it was a very good decision. And I suppose when I look at buying Bitcoin, I think, you know, this is my one very important decision that I'm going to commit to, which is buying this new digitally hard asset and also having the conviction to hold on to it. Because at the end of the day, I kind of feel that the understanding of digital scarcity will continue to improve, and ultimately we need to, as a generation, accumulate hard assets as well. And I just think Bitcoin is going to be the one.
Yeah, and like, it doesn't matter whether an individual can get it, because some of the world already gets it, and those in the world that don't get it, well, they're highly likely to die sooner than those who already get it. And I just like giving the Peter Schiff example. Like, his son Spencer gets it, Peter's probably going to die. Peter Schiff only holds gold, is incentivized obviously to be pro gold and anti Bitcoin because of his businesses. But you know, he's going to die, and possibly all those gold bars, when his son Spencer inherits them, would be like, well, I can pay for storage and keep them, or I can put it into Bitcoin and it'll outperform it. So, you know, the capital just moves to the digital version. You know, whether an individual or not can get it, it's just like saying, you know, oh, I like my record player, but that doesn't mean everyone's going to use records, as we've seen. Yeah. You know, even though some people think, oh, the sound is better, it's like, you know, piss off. What's a record?
Yeah, and I think there will always be a mix. You know, I think that the idea that, you know, Bitcoin will replace gold, you know, is maybe a bit out there for, you know, at this stage. It's one of those things where the best thing to you know, visualize for myself is people just slowly decreasing their allocation of gold and putting some into Bitcoin, you know, because intuitively it makes sense. You know, a lot of people who are really into gold and really understand gold and that are against Bitcoin are actually very, very much on the same page. They just haven't, you know, made that transition yet. And, you know, as you said, that transition could be fast, it could be slow, but inevitably I feel like that transition will come, you know, and in my opinion, it's only a matter of time. As you said, I do think that's the way it's going.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like, I don't think gold gets fully demonetized. Maybe it does. I don't know. That there has to be a physical element left. I don't know. Yeah, who knows? Beyond my pay grade. all I know is that Bitcoin seems to be outperforming every asset class in the world, has been, and the macro setup looks like it's going to continue to do that. So me as an investor, it's like definitely something I'm paying attention to in all the places where I can put my capital. And another thing you mentioned is, you know, you've been younger and priced out of property, and it's just like, well, what choice have people got now? They have to push out a bit more risk, you know, and even my sister was thinking about, you know, she's trying to get on the property ladder. And like, in my head, I'm just like, get all that money, put it in Bitcoin and sit in your hands for 4 years. Obviously, I didn't tell her that because you can't, you know, want to push people. But in my head, I'm like, if I was in that situation, knowing what I know now, that's what I do, because saving currency, which is constantly going down in value, to buy an asset that's constantly going up in value, it's just like, it's unachievable, I suppose. So I'm forced to take a bet here. I have to take a bet as opposed to just be prudent and work and save money. That doesn't work anymore, I suppose.
Yeah, and in simple terms, I just kind of look at the whole market that we're in, whether it be from a job perspective or, you know, an investment perspective, and just kind of, in simple terms, we're in such an asymmetric market at the moment. As in, for me, all the risk around what I'm doing, you know, I've never been more exposed to Bitcoin as an asset as I am now. But I check the price of Bitcoin, you know, less and less and less, you know, every week. And as in simple terms, for me, you know, I know my downside. You know, my downside is that, you know, people will say it's likely, but, you know, we'll know it's not, that Bitcoin goes to zero. And, you know, I'm perfectly okay with that possibility. But from where I'm sitting right now, the upside is completely asymmetric. You know, there's so much that's coming. There's so much being built on it. You see what Jack Mallers is doing. You know, you see how the space is just constantly increasing, and people, you know, the digital scarcity aspect is increasing. You see what Saylor is doing, and ultimately, when I sit here, I don't see it as risky anymore. And, you know, people will completely disagree with that, but I know my downside, and I understand it. And Bitcoin at zero is possible to others, it's impossible to me. And so I just kind of look at the upside, and I see how it's growing, and I see what people like Strike are doing, and say, this is something that I want to be a part of and want to get involved in. And as we said about the fixed cap, there's only so much but that's ever going to be produced. The last Bitcoin will be mined in 2140, and after that, we won't be here. That's the reality. But in short, digital scarcity is such a new concept that it's going to take time to catch on. But at the end of the day, gold bugs, I think, are going to come to the same conclusion, that this is a new asset that's coming to the forefront, and it's similar to what I've held for the past 30 or 40 years. I don't want to go all in because I think it's this, that, and the other, but I'll dabble in it. And I just think that allocation is going to continue and increase. And then obviously, as you go way more kind of down what people deem the tinfoil hat kind of side of things, is that, what if we continuously go through these processes of currency debasement? And what if people eventually just say, enough is enough? We've watched the currency be debased over and over and over again. And, we're working all our lives for this money, and you're printing it like it's nothing. Why don't we swap to, a new reserve currency? Why don't we make it Bitcoin, or why don't we start using Bitcoin? And while that's minimal, if it's non-zero, then, that's something that I think I should be taking a punt on as well.
Yeah. And then even at a higher level than that, it's just like, well, because we all just, humans, we operate out of self-interest, and we're always comparing ourselves to those around us. So it's like, well, he bought Bitcoin and I'm struggling, but he seems to be doing all right. Maybe I'll try that. And then they do it. And then it's like another few years, so eventually people are just, you look and you see what people are doing. And if it's like, he's doing well, he's a brain surgeon, right? I can't do that. He told me he bought Bitcoin. All he's been telling me is just to buy Bitcoin, and life seems to be good for him. Maybe I'll try that. And this is a period of, a decade, 2 decades of this to spread throughout the world. And, it's only a black swan, that an unknown, I suppose, that breaks Bitcoin. And then it's like, well, is there really as much risk? Are we over quantifying the risk? It's something that I sort of play with, because you can be like, when you understand that, and the amount of people, hundreds of thousands of people in the world who are working on this thing every day to make it better. There's such a migration of talent as well. We see these people leaving the big banks and they're going to work for crypto companies. And so there's all this talent on this thing. And when you actually do the work, you're like, holy shit, this is inevitability. And then you're like, well, why are we saying it's so risky? Like maybe going up in an airplane. Like obviously if you fall out of the airplane, you're going to die. That's really risky. But it's more dangerous to get in a car, but we don't quantify it the same. Are we misinterpreting the risk and thinking that this is more risk than it is? And then in 50 years time, people be reading history books going, oh my God, how are they so dumb? Why didn't they all just allocate everything?
Yeah, well, I just think as well, from an industry perspective, as you said, people are leaving the big banks and they're going to, the likes of Binance and all these other crypto exchanges that are popping up. You young people going straight into crypto jobs, because I suppose the joy of crypto is that there's no Bitcoin degree. So if you've done the work and you've put the time in your own time, you're just as employable as anybody else in the Bitcoin space, which, is a really good opportunity for people like, whether it be myself or other individuals coming out of courses that are thinking, oh, I can't go down the finance route because my degree is in something completely different, but I've been learning about Bitcoin for 2 years on the side. Firms are hiring for that now. And I just suppose I can never understand, when I'm sitting looking at the space, why would you be the skeptic? But it just goes back to, this industry is clearly so asymmetrically skewed to the upside. Why sit right now with what we've seen and be the skeptic in this space? That's just my personal opinion. I just don't quite get it. I think there's so much happening. You see, as you said, people are moving from these old legacy firms into these new crypto firms. It's like you're right slap bang in the middle of something that's what seems to be old, but it's actually really just getting started. And in my opinion, why not be involved? And I suppose that's kind of the opinion I took when I came out of college, and when I got into this, and when I got heavily involved with what we're doing here in Skilling. And I want to be on the right side of this. If it doesn't end up being what we all think it's going to be, that's fine. But I'm willing to sit on the right side of this asymmetric risk. And see where it goes. And I think that it's crazy to me that there is still so much skepticism. I understand, critiques of it. I understand the energy debate, and we like discussing that, as you said, with the flared gas and ADs and demand side management and all those things. That's a good discussion to have. You need to keep yourself honest in the space. You can't just keep saying buy Bitcoin. You need to take on board what people are saying. But in simple terms, I just can't get the continuing skeptic in people that they say this has been going for 10 years and cross-border payments, zero fee cross-border payments isn't an intrinsic value. All these other kind of comments that it has zero intrinsic value, but you see what Stripe are doing, go up against Western Union and all these other firms. Remitly's worth 8 billion and it just does remittances, and you can do that free, permissionless, instant on Lightning, and all these things that are popping up. I just think it makes sense to be sat on the right side of that.
Deadly. In terms of Ireland, where do you think we are with our Bitcoin adoption, our understanding of the industry, or how much it's being adopted throughout the country? And by the way, for anyone listening, you're getting some value, you want to help this, hit the like, hit the subscribe, throw a comment in, let us know what you think of it. But where do you think we are? Are we ahead or behind? I've been to some conferences in other countries, and I've seen the vibe and the community aspect, and I'm just wondering what's your take on that in Ireland, and how can we drive it forward?
I would personally say that we're unfortunately probably a bit behind. What I've kind of seen personally is that, especially with the interactions that people are having with the central bank and, new businesses trying to come here, Ireland says that we're a fintech country, but when you have, really important crypto companies trying to come to Ireland and they're sitting and not getting responses from our central bank, which, is what I've seen in some of the comments, is that these firms are waiting, weeks and months just to get responses to provide more documents to eventually go through the e-money license and then get their, virtual asset license. And the process just seems to be too slow, and I can't understand why supposedly fintech countries isn't, all over this. We should be, I think, encouraging as many of these crypto firms to come here. But at the moment, that just doesn't seem to be the case. And I don't know if what we need to do is, streamline that process. Of course, not be reckless and bring in firms that shouldn't be here. But ultimately, I think, we should be opening ourselves up a lot more as a country and adopting this whole fintech role that we say we have, and encouraging these firms to come here, as opposed to leaving them waiting for months to get their licenses and start operating.
Sure. And then from say the general public, where do you think we are?
It's hard to tell. The past few months have been pretty interesting from that regard. Obviously, we had a small meetup down here in February at our office, which, a couple of, 24 people showed up to. You obviously some of them going on in the north that are doing extremely well. I feel like the community is obviously, quite small still, but it's very hard to tell, and I suppose you don't really know, you have a lot of, I get emails from a lot of secret Bitcoiners in quotes, that have said, I've been involved in this for 4 or 5 years. I've never met anyone else that has been, and when they've seen our Twitter and they've seen what we're doing, building the containers, trying to put them on AD sites, they're saying, oh, Bitcoin is happening here. And then they, see some of the Telegram chats that we have and they start talking. And I suppose while the community is still quite small, I do think it's getting there. But at the same time, as I said, if things aren't improving higher up, ultimately, I think that'll, crush it a small bit. I think people need to see us moving as a country and, as a whole with our policies to encourage more of these crypto firms to come. Otherwise, I feel like it'll just stay as individuals, having our meetups, bit by bit. But as you said, I kind of feel like the way we drive it on is hopefully with stuff like we're doing here at Scilling, which is getting these containers rolled out, showing how Bitcoin mining can reduce emissions, how it can interact with the grid and be a flexible on-grid asset, dealing with all that kind of things, having meetups and ultimately progressing things that way.
Deadly. Mark, it's been awesome chatting to you. Before I let you go, though, just for a bit of crack. Now, we know this isn't financial advice because, well, I don't know if you're a financial advisor, but I'm not.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
No, but what's the price of Bitcoin in 2030? You can give me your bullish and your bearish answer if you want, or you can just stick with one, or you can be politically correct and go, oh, I don't care. Really, that'll be a lie.
Yeah, I suppose by 2030, we've got two halvings to go till then. I would like to say that it'll be upwards of the 500,000 mark. You know, people probably say that's incredibly bearish, but that's probably the area that I'd see it at. You know, people will say 1 million a coin, and it sounds far-fetched, but I just personally see the mining market continue to grow. See all these, the idea of flexible assets. You see the Exxon's getting involved, you know, energy companies mining Bitcoin. I see what Strike is doing to continue to pick up, and there'll be more transactions happening on the Lightning Network. And ultimately, I do think we'll push into that kind of area of, you know, the 500,000 mark and above. And then obviously, if we go way down the kind of tinfoil hat side of things, and you see people finally getting sick of currency debasement, then, you know, I wouldn't even put a figure on it.
Yeah. And another thing that is interesting is, and it's only recent, miners not selling, because you even mentioned it, that you don't want to sell your Bitcoin. So like, how does that work then? If we've increased adoption and no supply, well, the number has to just keep going up until someone says, right, I'm a seller at this price. But it'll cause this massive overshoot, won't it?
Yeah, it seems that way. You know, that's one of the things, you know, yeah, it has the potential to, you know, on-chain is something that has been, you know, on-chain analysis has been one of these things that has, you know, garnered so much debate over the past 18 months. And it's obviously something that when I was kind of really getting stuck into Bitcoin, I was only kind of getting started, you know, where people talk about this illiquid supply and miners now not selling anymore. And as a result, but I suppose the key thing is that, you know, the buying does have to kick in. You know, you don't want to be the downer on it all, but the buying does have to kick in if we want things to progress. But at the same time, I think that will come with an increase in understanding, you know, and I think that will continue to be slow for the time being. You know, our goal, you know, with Skilling to kind of improve the understanding is that you currently have people voting in the European Union to ban proof of work and all these other things. And we want to bring all these MEPs and show them the containers and show them interacting with the grid and operating demand side. And all of these things then will slowly progress. You know, you won't have a new bill coming to the European Union every 6 months trying to ban proof of work. That understanding will happen slowly. And people who are energy skeptics and absolutely despise Bitcoin might say, if this is allowing an increase in renewable capacity and, you know, a net reduction in carbon emission on farms, I might change my opinion slowly but surely. And I think that will happen. It's just, I don't know what we've obviously seen over the past year when we were at 40 or 50K, 100 was imminent, and, you know, everyone thought it was, but that just didn't materialize. You know, the demand didn't kick in. And so while people think that we're going to teleport to 100K, I do think it might be a bit slower, you know, but at the end of the day, if you take away the price, you know, there's still an extremely important network that's operating, you know, as you said, doing what Stripe are doing. Proof of work mechanism is allowing, you know, people to monetize energy at source and so on. These things keep going. You know, it is kind of the idea of, you know, TikTok next block. If just because the price doesn't go to 100K doesn't mean anything stops. It doesn't mean you have a team of developers that, like I enjoyed, that just say, you know, we haven't gotten enough out of this, let's just dump it and leave it be, or they get bored or they've made their money and they stop. You know, Bitcoin doesn't care. You know, it's the network is going to keep ticking along. Every 10 minutes there's going to be a new block, and that's never going to change. It's just a matter of how long will it take for that demand to kick in, and that's an unknown, but being involved is the important part.
Awesome. Mark, it was great to chat to you, man, and to find out about Skilling Mining, and looking forward to seeing you guys progress and staying in touch. Thanks very much, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Dinny. Thanks for having me on.